Tonight, the story coming out of Iran is moving incredibly fast, and the headline alone doesn't tell you the real story. In the middle of a growing regional crisis, Iran has introduced a new supreme leader, and within hours, his first message aimed at the United States wasn't cautious, diplomatic, or calming. Instead, it sounded like a warning. The message suggested that this conflict is not going to end on someone else's timeline. When leadership changes during a crisis like this, the first words are rarely just words. They are signals of power, control, and intent. And what we're seeing right now may be the opening move in a much larger geopolitical chess match. Before we go any further, there's an important ground rule for how to look at a moment like this. In an information war, dramatic claims spread faster than verified facts. You'll hear about leaked documents, secret transcripts, and supposed insider confirmations. But certainty is often exactly what nobody truly has in the early hours of a developing story. So the responsible way to approach this is simple. Separate what is being claimed from what is confirmed, examine why the language matters, and think about what the next moves could look like, militarily, economically, and politically. According to the narrative circulating widely, Iranian state television interrupted its programming as a senior commander and religious figures appeared on screen to announce the country's new supreme leader. The man presented as the successor is described as Mojtaba, a 56-year-old figure known to be the son of the previous leader. The announcement was followed quickly by messages of loyalty from institutions across the state structure, and shortly afterward came public messaging directed outward, particularly toward the United States. When a nation changes leadership in the middle of a tense geopolitical situation, the first speech usually carries far more meaning than a typical address. It becomes a test of authority, a loyalty signal to insiders, and a warning to outside powers. Many people hear new leader and immediately focus on personality or biography. But the deeper question is always about power: who supported the rise of this leader, who protects his authority, and which institutions inside the system truly benefit from him occupying that position. The sequence being described: rapid announcement, immediate pledges of allegiance, followed by strong external messaging, is not random. It is designed to project stability. The underlying signal is clear. The chain of command is intact, the security structure is unified, and outside observers should not assume that a leadership change creates chaos or weakness. Messages like that are aimed not only at foreign governments, but also at citizens inside the country who may be watching closely for signs of instability. Moments like this always have two audiences. One is external: foreign governments, military alliances, regional powers, financial markets, and global energy traders. The other audience is internal: political factions, security institutions, and the general population. The internal audience often shapes the tone of the external message. A newly installed leader cannot appear uncertain or hesitant, especially during a crisis. Even if private discussions include possible off-ramps or negotiations, the public message must sound confident, controlled, and decisive. In the narrative surrounding this announcement, the central theme of the message toward the United States focuses on military presence in the region. The framing suggests that the presence itself is being portrayed as the core issue. That kind of framing matters because it turns the conversation away from smaller bargaining points and toward a much larger objective: withdrawal and strategic change. When rhetoric moves to that level, diplomacy becomes more complicated. Agreements, if they happen, tend to occur quietly through indirect channels rather than through dramatic public announcements. But the political story is only part of the picture. The real global impact of rhetoric like this often appears in the economic sphere, especially energy markets. In discussions surrounding this moment, attention quickly turns toward the Persian Gulf and the narrow maritime passage known as the Strait of Hormuz. This location isn't just geography, it is one of the most important energy corridors in the world. A significant portion of global oil shipments travels through that narrow route. Even the suggestion of disruption in that corridor can ripple through global markets. Tanker insurance costs can rise, shipping routes can shift, delivery schedules can tighten, and energy prices can jump quickly. The important point is that an actual blockade isn't always necessary to create economic pressure. Sometimes the threat alone is enough to trigger volatility, influence market expectations, and push governments into difficult policy decisions. That is why messaging around energy routes carries so much weight in geopolitical conflicts. Military actions might shape the battlefield, but energy messaging shapes the global economy. A single statement about shipping routes can affect fuel prices, transportation costs, airline operations, and even food supply chains. It becomes a form of indirect leverage that reaches far beyond the immediate region. Another key element in the narrative focuses on the personal background of the new leader. He is often described as someone who operated largely behind the scenes rather than holding visible public office. Reports emphasize his religious education and his connections with influential security institutions. In political systems where security forces play a central role, those kinds of ties often signal alignment with the structures that enforce authority and maintain internal stability. That background is one reason some observers interpret the leadership transition not as a reform moment, but as a consolidation move. It suggests continuity with existing power centers rather than a shift toward a new political direction. However, it's important to remember that labels like hardline can mean many different things. They might reflect ideological views, tolerance for risk, dependence on security factions, or simply the language leaders use in public speeches. There is also debate around the religious legitimacy of the new leader within clerical hierarchies. In systems where religion and state authority are deeply intertwined, legitimacy becomes a critical resource. Titles, scholarly recognition, and clerical rank can influence how authority is accepted by institutions and the broader population. When legitimacy is questioned, governments sometimes compensate by relying more heavily on security structures and tightly controlled messaging. That dynamic can create an interesting paradox. A system may appear strong because it demonstrates strict discipline and control. At the same time, the underlying reliance on enforcement rather than consensus can make it more fragile during prolonged stress. Analysts often watch closely to see whether decisions are coming primarily from religious leadership or from security institutions operating behind the scenes. Another layer of the situation involves messaging coming from the United States. In tense geopolitical moments, even statements that appear routine can be interpreted as attempts to influence leadership decisions inside another country. When that perception spreads, leadership transitions can quickly become tests of defiance or independence. Newly installed leaders often feel pressure to demonstrate that they cannot be pushed around by outside powers. This is why early rhetoric can become intense. The first statements after a leadership change are often less about policy details and more about posture. Posture helps reassure supporters, deter rivals, and prevent opponents from testing perceived weakness. By framing early developments as victories, leaders attempt to create a sense of momentum that strengthens internal unity. However, the concept of victory in conflicts like this can be highly flexible. One side may point to military casualties inflicted or economic disruptions caused. The other side may point to infrastructure damage, strategic strikes, or degraded capabilities. Both sides can claim success at the same time, which is one reason conflicts sometimes drag on longer than expected. For observers trying to understand where events might go next, the most useful approach is to watch indicators rather than speeches alone. Changes in military targeting patterns, energy shipping activity, casualty numbers, and diplomatic travel often reveal more than public rhetoric. If energy infrastructure becomes a direct target, pressure increases quickly across multiple countries. If casualties rise sharply, domestic politics begins to influence military strategy. Energy markets remain one of the most sensitive indicators in situations like this. When oil prices rise rapidly, the impact spreads across transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and consumer goods. Even countries that produce energy domestically can feel the ripple effects because global prices influence global supply chains. In that sense, an energy war becomes a kind of economic pressure felt worldwide. This explains why some analysts call the Strait of Hormuz the most dangerous variable in regional conflicts. The corridor holds enormous leverage, but using that leverage carries risks. Disruption could trigger stronger international responses, alienate potential partners, and even harm the revenue streams of the country attempting to apply pressure. For a new leader stepping into power during an ongoing crisis, the challenge is balancing appearance with strategy. Leaders must appear strong enough to maintain authority at home while also calculating the long-term consequences of escalation abroad. The language used in early speeches often reflects that balancing act, projecting confidence while leaving certain options quietly open behind the scenes. In the end, the significance of the first message lies not in the exact wording, but in the signal it sends. The signal being projected right now is one of unity, continuity, and resistance to outside pressure. Whether that signal represents a long-term strategy or a form of deterrent theater will only become clear through actions over time. For viewers watching from around the world, the most practical approach is to focus on measurable developments: energy prices, shipping movements, confirmed military actions, and official government advisories. Those indicators often reveal more about the trajectory of a conflict than dramatic headlines or viral claims circulating online. Moments like this remind us that global stability can hinge on a handful of strategic choices. Leadership decisions, military responses, economic pressures, and diplomatic channels all interact in complex ways. The story unfolding right now is not only about one country's leadership change, it is about how that change could reshape the balance of power, energy markets, and international relations in the months ahead. 1.